Hey, everybody. I've been getting asked a lot of questions lately about what I thought the stock market was going to do and what I thought interest rates were going to do. So I've put together my annual forecast and I wanted to share it with you. Let's get started. So 2021 recap, if you got our newsletter or our forecast last year, our expectations last year was that we expected interest rates to rise and then we expected them to come down later in the fall. So what actually happened is interest rates did rise, but they fell quite a bit by June. They recovered by summer. And so we were a little bit off on when they would get better, but they did get better. Housing, we expected a strong demand and a tight supply for housing. We expected some really good appreciation between 5 and 8%. So what actually happened is that we did have double-digit appreciation. We had 11 to 14%, depending on the market, for home value increase. So 2022, we believe that the Fed's going to play a major role in 2022. They're tapering bond purchases. They're going to be increasing rate hikes. And then they're also going to be doing balance sheet runoff, which we're going to talk about that shortly. Now, everything the Fed does, it'll impact the stock market, it'll impact interest rates, it'll impact housing. And one of their main focuses is that it'll even impact the job market and the employment market also. So the Fed members, the voting members of the Fed, they rotate every year. And the members for 2021, they were very accommodative. They wanted to keep interest rates low. They wanted to do stimulus. They were very happy that way. The 2022 members that came in January, they are less accommodative. They want to rise rates faster and they don't want to do any stimulus. They're very much more hawkish than the 2021 voting members that we had. Fighting inflation, that's going to be their main focus. It's going to be inflation, inflation, inflation. And that could cause some negative stock market returns. So we'll take a look at that a little bit later. The Fed, it's true, they should have hiked earlier. They thought that inflation was transitory, and it wasn't. Inflation grew and grew, and it's about 7% today. So when I, started looking at what I think 2020 is going to do, we're always going to look back in history. And let me show you some of the research I've been looking at, especially with the Fed. So back in 1978, Arthur Burns became Fed chair. And during his, tenure, inflation rose and rose. And he kept saying, oh, it's transitory, it's transitory. Just like they said, every meeting in 2021. Now, during Arthur Burns' tenure, inflation went from 7% to 2 years later, 14%. And he did nothing about it. He kept insisting it was transitory. The higher inflation, it caused mortgage rates to rise. When he started in 1978, they were at 12%. And 1980, when he left, because of the inflation, interest rates went up to 18%. Now, Paul Volcker comes in. He comes in 1980, and he fought inflation heavily. He raised the federal funds rate from 11% to 20% over a 2-year period. During his tenure, the inflation dropped from 14% down to 5%. And because inflation was dropping, mortgage rates also dropped. They dropped from 18% in 1980 down to 12% in 1982. Now, there were some other consequences because of what he did. The stock market fell about 30%. And the tighter monetary policy pushed the U.S. economy into recession in 1982. Now, Alan Greenspan comes along in the late 1990s, and inflation doubled during his period. It went from 1.75 to 3.5. Not a lot, but it was still a doubling. It was still 100% higher. During this time, the inflation going up caused mortgage rates to go up pretty much by the same amount. They went up from 7% to 8.5. Now, unlike Burns, Greenspan took action. And in 1999, he started hiking the Fed funds rate. And he hiked the Fed funds rate 1.75%, really just matching inflation. And interest rates during that time when the inflation was going up, they went from 4.75 to 6.5%. Now, after he started hiking interest rates, the inflation dropped from 3.5 all the way to 1, even lower than it was when he came in. And during that time, interest rates dropped. They dropped from 8.5 down to 5.5. Now, there were some consequences with Greenspan. You remember, 2000, the dot-com bubble, but him hiking the Fed funds rate, immediately the S&P 500 dropped 50%. And of course, the US economy fell into a recession. Today, we got Jerome Powell as the Fed chair. And during 2021, inflation increased from 1.75 to 7. And every meeting in 2021, Jerome Powell would use the word transitory. Inflation is transitory. It's not going to last. Well, because of the higher inflation, mortgage rates rose. They rose from 2.5% to 3.375%. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot. They're very low interest rates, but let's keep in mind that they rose 40%. Interest rates rose 40%. And as a percentage, it's quite a large number. Now, the Fed is purchasing new mortgage bond securities every single month. And in the November meeting, they announced that they're going to start tapering. So the amount that they're purchasing for new bonds is going to go down every single month. And by March, they're not going to be purchasing new mortgage-backed securities or other treasuries anymore. And the reason they're doing this is because they want to hike rates, but they can't really hike rates and keep buying bonds. And they don't want to do both at the same time. They kind of want to ease into everything. So right now, their plan is to taper the mortgage-backed securities and the bond buying purchasing, and then they're going to start to hike rates in 2022. And they're expecting 2 to 3 rate hikes in 2022 and 2 to 4 rate hikes in 2023. Now, we still expect inflation to increase until the Fed really acts. And so interest rates as well as inflation, they can still rise. Now, if the Fed can tame the inflation, mortgage rates should drop too. But we're concerned that mortgage rates might be dropping from a higher number. So we think interest rates will go higher. And then if the Fed gets inflation under control, that should, cause interest rates to lower. But from what number? If it's higher today, how much will they really be lower compared to today? So, let's recap real quick. Let me see if we can see a pattern here. During the Burns and Volcker period, inflation went from 7 to 14. Greenspan period, we went from 2 to 3.5. And Jerome Powell, inflation went from 2 to 7. Now, mortgage rates, they went up 12 to 18 with the inflation, 7 to 8.5. And during Jerome Powell, 2.5 to 3.375. The Fed funds rate, Volcker increased it. He went from 11 to 20%. Alan Greenspan rose the Fed funds rate from 4.75 to 6.5. And Jerome Powell did nothing. He kept the Fed funds rate at 0, but they are expecting to increase it in 2022, probably to around 1%. Now, inflation response. Under Volcker, inflation dropped from 14 to 5. And Greenspan, 3.5 to 1. And we expect inflation to also drop as they start raising rates. And mortgage rate response, 18 to 12, 8.5 to 5.5. And we also expect interest rates to decline as inflation declines. There's a clear historic pattern of as inflation goes down, interest rates go down. As inflation goes up, interest rates go up. Now, we got consequences every time that the Fed gets involved and try to slow down the economy. There are things that happen. And during 1982, the S&P fell 30% and we entered a recession. And then 2000, 2001, the S&P fell 50% and we entered a recession. So will stocks drop and will there be a recession? Stocks are really expensive right now, so that's yet to come, but we will find out. Now, we got a few wild cards for 2022, things that we know is going to affect things and we don't really know how. And the first is COVID. COVID plays a major role in monetary policy, supply chains, the politicians, how they look at things, and any surprise in COVID, good or bad, will change our outlook and change the trajectory of the economy going forward. Now, there's still talk, I don't know why, but there's still talk of additional stimulus. And if the government gets involved with more stimulus, that could push stock prices higher. It could cause interest rates to rise further, and it could make the Fed's jobs of corralling inflation, even more difficult if they keep printing money. The runoff of the Fed's balance sheet. Now, this is really interesting. So we talked earlier that the Fed is still purchasing new mortgage bond securities every month, and every month they're tapering. So they're purchasing less and less mortgage-backed securities, but they're still purchasing new mortgage bonds every single month. Now, the first step is that they're going to taper and they're going to slow that, and they're eventually going to stop. The second step is that they are going to hike the Fed funds rate. They are going to increase the Fed funds rate to try to tame inflation. Now, there's a third thing the Feds are doing, and they are still the biggest buyer of mortgages on the market. And they're buying about $70 billion in mortgages through reinvestments. So the Fed has this great big balance sheet of mortgages. And as people refinance or as they sell their home, their mortgage gets paid off. And so the Fed wants to keep their balance sheet at the same. So as you pay off your mortgage, the Fed takes that money from the payoff and they go buy new mortgages. And so even though they're tapering and even though they're going to, hike the Fed funds rate, they haven't said anything about the reinvestments. But right now they're still planning on being that major mortgage buyer in the market. And as loans pay off, they're going to buy new bonds. Eventually, they're going to stop the reinvestment program and they're just going to allow bonds to pay off. And when that happens, we could see quite a rise in interest rates as we don't have that major player buying the bonds. So our stock market forecast, we feel that, by all measures, stocks are really expensive. And the measure we look at the most is the price to earnings. And right now it's 28.3%. And it's extremely overvalued. And if you look at all measurements of stock prices, everything is high comparatively to where these have been in the past. A rate hike could cause the price to earnings ratio to come down, and that would result in lower stock market returns. Everything is relative. And as interest rates go up and the yield you can get an interest rate, the yield and you can get in stocks needs to go down too. And that happens through the PE ratio, and it happens through stock prices coming down to maintain that relative yield. Now, our forecast for 22 is actually that stocks are going to decline 20%. That with the Fed action, we think stocks are going to go down. Hopefully it's not 30% or 50% like it was in years past, but we are expecting decline right around 10%. Our interest rate forecast, we expect inflation during the first part of the year to keep rising. And so we expect interest rates to rise up to about 3.75%. With the Fed action and with them bringing down inflation over time, we expect this to lead to lower mortgage rates in the future. And we think that during the second half of the year, rates will come down towards 3%. So rates will rise to 3.75 during the first half. And then during the second half, we will see rates actually come down as the Fed hikes rates. Now, it's counterintuitive. The Fed is raising the Fed funds rate. Now that's causing inflation to come down, and it's causing mortgage rates, which are 30-year bonds and in a much different area of the spectrum. The Fed funds rate is a overnight rate, or it's a one-day rate, and mortgages are a 30-year rate. So they are different, but our hope is that as the Fed raises the Fed funds rate, inflation comes down and interest rates drop back down to 3%. Right now, we're talking to a lot of clients, and some people want to buy down interest rates, pay money up front to get a lower interest rate, to get interest rates back where they were a couple months ago. And we're typically advising clients not to do that, we think just take the rate right now, don't pay the extra closing costs. And in the future, we expect there to be a refinance opportunity, and there's no reason to pay extra, get a lower rate when we can refinance it for free in the future. Now, our housing forecast, we think housing will remain strong in 2022. We don't think it's going to be as strong in 2021. 2021 was crazy. So demand is going to be slightly softer because of the rise in interest rates, but it's still going to be robust. There's still a lot of buyers out there that want to buy the home. So home prices may not be going up 15, 20%, but they're still going to go up, and supply is still going to remain tight. There's not very much labor out there to build new houses. The contractors can't get their supply chain and their devices in, and the semiconductor shortage. I mean, all the devices in our house, whether it's the furnace, the fridge, they all contain semiconductors, and they're hard to get in right now. Rents, we think rents are going to continue to rise, and rents rose incredibly last year. So we think rents will rise another 5%, and that's going to push more people to be like, why am I renting? Why am I renting? Why do I keep paying more money for rent? It's time to buy. Eventually, it doesn't make any sense to rent anymore. So even with home prices going up, there's still a lot of people out there renting, and as rents go up, they're going to want to buy a house. So we're thinking 5 to 8% in appreciation for Utah. So home still, the best way that you can create wealth is really through owning your own home. And if you don't own a home, it's time to buy. I don't see home prices going down. Maybe they won't go up as fast in 2022, but if you're renting and you're stable, it's time to buy. Homes are always going to be a great investment. If you have any questions, give me a call, reach out. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much.